Is this thing reliable? Oh, sorry. I'm going to hand these out to the tables real quick. Cool. Whoever's at the table, just enough for whoever's at the table. Hey, how's it going? What's up?
In advance.
How are you?
Appreciate you.
Appreciate you. I don't know how to shut this thing off.
Lord, thank you for the space and this time that we have to gather. And Lord, thank you for a little bit of a different format. Thank you for Graham's willingness to share some of his experience and his wisdom with us. Lord, I pray that you would speak to him and through him. And Lord, help us to maybe gather some thoughts and some ideas and Lord, that we would gain willingness and ability to defend the gospel and to share the hope that you've given us. And Lord, the love that you have shown through the gospel, may we be able to share that with our neighbors and coworkers. Lord, thank you for this space, and I pray that you would bless it. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. Graham, thank you. Graham is a real pro. So Graham works with Search, which is a nonprofit here in Greenville, and I feel like 1 out of every 2 people that I've met recently know you or have heard of Citylights through Search. So Graham is out in the real world in a workplace kind of defending the gospel and having conversations with people. And whenever we were talking about apologetics, which is interesting, that was what the church voted on. They wanted to hear more about. And Graham kind of came to mind pretty quickly, and I was really glad that you said yes. So I'm excited. And anything else I should say about you?
No, all good.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, take it away.
All right. Well, I really appreciate John and Oliver and all of you for giving me space to do this. I'm going to give you just a quick little background on me since I don't know a lot of you. So I am. We've been coming to Citylights for 2 years now. My wife Casey is right there. Yeah. Go ahead, everybody stand. Okay, I'm going to have her come up now, and I'm going to sit down. So we've got 3 kids. Our oldest is Evie, she's 8, and then Lottie is 5, and Asher is 3. We have been so blessed by Citylights in this church and this community of people. Our own city group has been such a gift to us, and some of those folks are here tonight. But we're just so thankful to have a church like this that, honestly, for me and what I do, to have a church that's willing to, who has a heart for other ministries in the city that are about the same thing is, it's unique. And it's a gift to me as I've seen a lot of the other where folks can really grab hold of something. And I'm just grateful to be a part of a leadership that says, hey, we share the same heart and the same type of ministry that desires to see people come to know Jesus in a deep way and walk with him relationship. So just want to share how grateful I am for that. To be clear about today, I I am introducing apologetics. I'm not going to answer all your questions. Sorry to burst your bubble on that. But really, in the coming weeks, I think what we're going to do today, we'll find a couple questions that I think are maybe of most shared interest, and those are going to be addressed here in the coming weeks, if that's right, John. Yeah. So my hope today is to really kind of give you an introduction to apologetics that gives you an excitement for what's to come. In just a second, we're going to make this a bit more conversational. I don't want you guys to sit there and listen to me talk for the next 90 minutes. So we're going to make this interactive, and I hope that's valuable to you. But my goal and hope today is that you walk out of here feeling like you have clarity around what apologetics is, how that's going to be beneficial for your life and your walk in faith, and also, I believe, the ministry that God has for you. Equipping in this way, I think, is critical to people, I'd say, knocking down some barriers and walls that they have around topics like this. I know for me, growing up in the church, I heard words like evangelism and apologetics, and I was terrified. I was like, I'm good. I'm going to go into the other room and leave that up to the professionals. But funny enough, I actually have been doing this now for 11 years. So that's what I want to talk about briefly, is what I do. So I work for Search Ministries. I've been doing it for 11 years, and I do relational evangelism is the simplest way I can put it. And part of that really does include apologetics. So real quick, our mission as an organization is to invite adults to take a next step toward God. Pretty simple. And so what that looks like for me is we create safe spaces where adults can have honest conversations about life and God. So for me personally, I grew up in a church where I was told the right answer a lot, and I was never really given the space or the table to say, you know what, I don't know if I believe all of this. And I've actually got some real questions that I'd love to ask. I never had space for that. So for me, when I was introduced to Search, almost 15 years ago, 2009, is when I moved here to town, and I was introduced to Search. And the style of ministry that was going on was one that did hold space for me to ask honest questions that I never felt like I could ask or bring to the table and be heard or just corrected. Somebody would just shake their finger at me in the past and just kind of say, you're wrong. Let me just tell you the right answer. So Search gave me just a different taste of those kinds of conversations. Learned that that's actually called apologetics, when you wrestle with those hard questions and learn to defend your faith. So a little bit more practically what that looks like. If we can go to that next slide. So some of the things that we do, we've got various groups that meet around town, and we'll read books, we'll read scripture, but one of the things why I put this up on the screen, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a picture and taste of some of what I do so that the conversation that I have with you moving forward makes a bit more sense. So if you look on the left side of that screen up there, you'll see something called an open forum. And so if you can read it, which I don't know if you can, you'll see that it says, it's not often we get the chance to discuss some of the big questions we all have about God and life. You're invited to an interactive discussion surrounding some of those questions that rarely get talked about. Like, can we know the truth about anything? What is our purpose in this life? Does God love everyone? How good is good enough? You get the point. So this is an invitation that we send out to, I'll use this table as an example, these two tables. Let's just say we all got together for a couple weeks, and I said, hey, I want you to invite some of your friends who you don't think, have any real faith or who are seeking. And we're going to invite them to sit at the table. We're going to host a 4-week discussion where we're going to have some drinks and some food, and we're going to talk about it for an hour. I'm going to facilitate a discussion where your friends get to ask any questions that they have about life and God. And so, as you can imagine at those tables, you get some really interesting discussions that happen. And so for me, and what I do is I help facilitate that dialogue. I think a lot of people are used to, at the end of this discussion, you're going to preach the gospel and make them walk down the aisle, right? Isn't this how it goes? Like, that's usually what we're used to, is like at the end of something, there's going to be an invitation. But with these open forums, what we do is we set a table, we make a promise that it's going to be an hour-long discussion, we'll get out of there on time, and I'll share my take and my view on like a biblical take on the question at the end, and you have space to share any question you have and your experience and your reason for why you'd answer it in a certain type of way. And so in those discussions, you have people who for the first time are able to raise their hand and say, I'll give you a picture of what my first open forum. This is my first year on staff. I was supposed to put one of these open forums on, and so we're at Coffee Underground, and we've got about 25 people in the room, and there's a Jewish rabbi in the room named Mark who had a lot to say. He was pretty chatty, and then there was a guy named Bo. These are two guys that I can remember very clearly, and Bo was the first guy to raise his hand. So I basically say, this is going to be an hour-long discussion. You can ask any question that you want. And the goal here is not for it to be a me against you, which that's some of what we're so used to. It was we can have an open discussion, and my role is going to be to facilitate a space that makes you feel heard. I want to make sure that this is not me against you. I may have a differing opinion, but we can have a relationship and talk about a hard question out here, but still maintain a thoughtful, engaging relationship between each other. Well, the first question that gets asked in that forum, I'm kind of looking for a layup in my first open forum. Well, Bo raises his hand and he says, okay, I got a question for you. And he said, my grandma, who is truly the nicest person I've ever met in my life, I don't think she's ever done wrong. She was just diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer, and they said that she's got, weeks to live. You tell me, how is there a good God in the world when he let something like that happen to the most kind person I know? And so, how do you respond to that, But for me in that moment, what I realized was, and this is where I was so thankful for the training that I received, the goal was not to tell Bo theologically why all of that made sense. What my role is so oftentimes in my job and what I do is to hold space for people to wrestle with their questions and to feel seen and heard. And so the open forum, our goal there is not to say, I'm here to answer all your questions. It actually is a launch point for meaningful relationship, a space for people to be known and seen. And then, we may get to a theological reasoning for Bo's question down the road, but in that moment, my role and my hope is that his friend sees the opportunity to care for him well and to follow up and to let him know that now he gets to check in with his friend and say, man, I didn't know that's what you're wrestling with, and that totally makes sense why you would be mad at God. So that gives you a little bit of a taste of some of the type of work that I'm doing and the type of spaces that we hold that is now going to shape some of our conversation around apologetics. Because the natural bent for me is to be relationally oriented in the type of apologetic discussions I'm having. You have some people, and you guys have seen this all over the internet, where we set up debates and you see apologetics as kind of like the buzzword for it, and you see people throw blows at each other to try to say, you are wrong, I am right, let me tell you why. And I will say, it's not like you leave those feeling like, man, I bet those folks have a really great relationship outside of this. If anything, it's like, well, whose side are you on? And, how far are you going to dig your heels into it? So today, my hope is that we can all recognize that you're probably not going to be the apologist who has a debate platform that's televised or all over the internet. Is that fair to say? If somebody's going to, please raise your hand, and I want to know and want to support that. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I today want to be able to equip you all to feel like there is a real space in your life for apologetics to take root and for it to be something that you can seek after and learn about for the sake of having a ministry in your life. That's some of the vision that I desire to cast in people's lives that I get to sit with. Is I don't want you to send all your people to me thinking that I'm the answer guy. Don't send all your people to John just because he's your pastor. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. And John, we have our own spaces, and this is what we do full time. But you all have relational capital in your lives, and have earned the right to be heard in people's lives in such a way that you should feel confident and equipped to sit in that space and understand that God does not intend for your ministry to just be passed off. He has a unique ministry for you. And today, if we walk out of here, you all feeling like, okay, I got a little bit of vision for what that looks like through the lens of apologetics, then I think we're winning. So that's kind of just a quick little intro I wanted to offer up. What I want to do before I just give you a definition of apologetics is this. Like I said, we're going to start off with, I don't want to sit here and talk the whole time. So we have 3 questions that we're going to do at the tables tonight. And it's going to take maybe 5 minutes. And here's what I'd say as you do this. The temptation is sometimes we get a question at a table or we get, a fill in the blank and you fill in a right answer and you did a good job. I don't want you guys to sit around the table and just tell each other's like the right answer or the answer you think you should offer. I really want you to take a breath and step into whatever question gets thrown up there and offer what you actually think and believe. So just go into it with that in mind. Have fun with this. Be honest. The more honest you can be, the more valuable it's going to be as we kind of collect some of the data that we gather from this, and we'll enjoy this. So this first one, I hope, just gives you a little bit of a taste test for some of the other ones that are coming. So without further ado, we can move to the next slide. That is not that one. There we go. Okay. So first question, and I'm going to give you all 5 minutes, and if you can, really try to get around the table. If you really don't want to share, you don't have to. But I really want to challenge you all to take some time to go around the table and answer this question, or a couple of questions. So the question is this: when you hear the word apologetics, what comes to mind, and how does it make you feel? And if you are comfortable sharing, why do you think that might be? So let's take 5 minutes and answer that question, and then we'll kind of gather some answers from the tables, and we'll keep things moving. So 5 minutes, let's do it. No, sorry. So the cards are not for that. You have to talk. So, yeah, cards are coming. We'll use that at the end to gather some questions. But for now, this is just conversation. Can I just grab a seat here? Great. For sharing. All right. It's back on. All right. I'm going to stop y'all there. Um, if we can we get just a couple takes from a few tables? What were some of the responses we got from that? Anybody want to share?
Does it mean something to do with an apology? Which, eventually, obviously, people figured out it didn't. But, also the idea that it's defending or validating your faith and, the fabrics of it and making some type of sense of it or teaching it to somebody else and having some type of discussion, which could be turning into a discourse depending on who you're talking to. But, yeah, it was just kind of people sharing that it was both, you know, what they thought of it at the surface level and then what they later found out it was actually about.
That's good.
And that they had negative feelings about it because there's, I guess, what we typically see now, which is always in arguments, and it's not really people trying to understand one another, but it's people trying to force the other person to, fall into this trap door of, thought. But then there's also the positive aspect, because again, you're also validating this, and in the same breath, you're teaching it if you're having the right discussion.
Right.
And you shouldn't feel bad about validating something that you believe is true.
Right. That's good. Thanks for sharing that. Any other feelings that it brought up as we get to past the truth that it's not apologizing, but defending our faith? How's it make y'all feel? Really comfortable? Easy?
She question is, do you feel that apologetics is a Western culture, like the dynamic of apologetics that we face in America, is it the same as what we would see in an Eastern type culture? Whereas in a Western culture, we feel it's very debatable. argumentative at times, can be very challenging. Is that conversation maybe more of a different style conversation, being in an Eastern culture that would probably be a minority as a Christian base? So,
That's a good question. Any other thoughts on that? Feelings? Yeah.
That feeling of like, maybe I shouldn't do this because I don't have the right answers.
Yeah, I think that's relatable. Yeah, I think the more we get into it, it's when I first came onto search staff. I remember walking into a room for the first time, and I felt like I was around all these people who had all the answers, and I didn't. And I was like, I don't know if I belong here. Maybe I should just leave it to these guys. So I think that feeling is one that, as I kind of first got into this, it's easy for us to have a sense of fear that if I somehow don't have the full and right answer, I'm going to ruin this for somebody. I'm going to somehow get in the way of the sovereign God of all things and be the reason why somebody can't come to faith. I mean, it's kind of a wild take when you say it out loud, but that really is like the heartfelt feeling, at least for me personally. It's like I don't want to get in the way of something potentially good happening and disrupt all of that if I don't have the right answer. So if we can, we can just move, the definition. So, I mean, we don't have to cover this at length, but you all were right. Apologetics, reasoned arguments or writing in justification of something, typically a theory or religious doctrine. The Greek word apologia means defense, as a lawyer gives a try, as if a lawyer was giving it at a trial. So it's quite literally a defense of the faith. Biblically speaking, as we look at apologetics, this is the passage that I highlight and that continues to spur me on to keep learning, to keep seeking after a clarity around the hope that I have. And so it's in 1 Peter 3:15, and Peter in this passage is talking to a group of believers who are all being persecuted at this point in time. And he's encouraging them in their walks and in their defense of this faith that they're walking out. And so he says this in 1 Peter 3:15, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. And so I share that because it's obvious that this is that it's biblical. This isn't just some Western man-made effort to defend our faith so that we can be right. You start to get a little bit of a taste for what God desires for our heart to look like as it relates to giving an answer to people, right? Gentleness and respect. It's not a dogmatic, punch in the teeth saying I'm right? So it's kind of always ironic to me when we start to feel. Is that me? Okay. When we start to feel those things, I hope that this can always at least be a checkpoint for us. When we start to feel self-righteous, or maybe you become a bit more equipped and have some good answers, and you start to feel a sense of, man, I can't believe they think that. How silly, right? All of a sudden, self-righteousness can creep in. So I hope that this passage of Scripture can at least ground us in this defining and understanding of what apologetics would look like in our lives. I wanted to put up on the screen just a few questions if we can, just to get the wheels turning on questions around apologetics that oftentimes come up. How do you know God exists? Is the Bible reliable? I'm a good person. Isn't that good enough? Can we know the truth about anything? I won't go through them all. But these probably all, to one degree or another, can be relatable for us. And these are kind of more of, I'd argue, some of the more classic responses. The more that we get into this today, we'll realize that these classical responses are what we can oftentimes come back to. But we also live in a culture that is constantly shifting and changing. And so we're not going to say, hey, these are the only questions you need to have answers for, because our culture is shifting. We live in a postmodern world that has a really interesting take on truth. And so these questions can kind of get blown up and forgotten, but I would argue that some of these what we'll see is as we talk through this a bit more, those, I'd say, fringe or cultural questions have some deeper roots in the answers to some of these questions. So hopefully this just familiarizes you with what apologetics is and biblically speaking, what it looks like for us to carry the defense of our faith in a certain type of way. So, the next question I want to tackle with you all, and we're not doing a table discussion quite yet, but why should apologetics matter to you as a Christian is the question that I want to answer with you all. So what I'd say first off is because God says so. For the simple-minded like myself, it's always a good reminder that like this is something that I believe God has for us in our lives. And I believe that it should matter to you because it's for you. People will always have questions, and not just other people, but you. To wrestle with the hard things now, I would argue is invaluable because life is going to keep happening to you. If we don't slow down enough to realize that it's kind of like going into marriage. If I just go in cold turkey and tell you, don't give me any marriage books, Charles, I don't want to hear any of your take on what marriage is like. Just let me go into this thing and take a swing at it. It's probably not going to go that well for me. There's going to be a lot of tripping and falling, a lot of confusion. And I think that that's something I want all of us to recognize as it relates to wrestling with the hard questions. And why, like, one of the nudge points that I wanted to offer tonight is I know this church and I know the people in this church desire to create a space where you can be honest. Like, we can all walk into the room and say, we're all Christians, we're all members of a church, aren't we all good? Truth is, everybody's at a different place in their spiritual journey. Nobody is on the same exact page. So if that's the truth, then the reality is we probably have some questions to offer up and questions to work through and wrestle through. I wanted to give you guys an example of what we do with one of our groups of guys. We call it an Iron Man group because they meet at 5:30 in the morning till 7:30 in the morning once a week for 2 years. And that group of guys, part of what they do is they cover apologetics. And what we used to do is we'd have this, we had a foundation study that would kind of like build up their foundational knowledge of who God is, who they are, and what does it look like to grow in a relationship with Him. And then we'd go into the apologetic side of things. But what I realized was doing that sometimes gets in the way of people being honest because you give them the right answers and then they just fill in the blank. And so we shifted gears and we moved the apologetic portion to the beginning. What I said to these guys was, I want to hear, like, what are your questions? What do you wrestle with? And so what we do is every Friday morning or whatever day was taking place, we had a chapter in this book that Search uses called Questioning God, and it covers like the 12 big apologetic questions. And these guys, I challenged them to prepare like a one-sheeter on what their response would be to the question, which sounds kind of weird, but the process of like doing the work mattered. And my goal was not for them to go and find the right answers. I mean, now with ChatGPT, I bet they could just go in and, have that done for them in no time. And even that alone is kind of we'll reference that in a minute here, but the goal is not just information and education. And what I challenged those guys to do was, hey, I don't want you to have a perfect buttoned-up answer as if you're some sort of, professional apologist, but what I do want you to do is spend time recognizing the objective truth that's offered to support and answer a really difficult question. And I want you to know that that's valuable. And you don't have to know thermodynamics to prove the existence of God. But what I do want you to know are the bits of the work that people have done to seek out the truth is invaluable to go and dig into. But one thing that I do want to make sure you do, and this is my challenge to them, was come to the table at least with your 3 bullet points. Like, what do you pull from the study that we're doing that you own in your own heart? That you say, man, that was like, I did not know that, and that grounds me in a unique way that I'd love to share with somebody. And it doesn't mean you're going to have all the right answers for that question and be able to respond to somebody as if they're reading the book. That's never going to happen. But if you can come to the table with your honest response, that is three statements that help support your argument, we're winning. And so these guys would show up, and what we do is just put their names in a hat and pull two names out. And those guys would have to defend the question. And everybody else in the room would play skeptic. So it was kind of this experience of, all right, if we were to sit in a room and somebody was to just fire off on, guys got creative with it because they'd start to create like little mini characters, and they say, well, the reason I think this is because here's what's happened in my life. And all of a sudden, it actually set you up in a real-time experience, because the truth is life doesn't happen in a way that's like, Tony, what are the answers to this question, this question, and this question? Can you just send them my way? You end up having to get into the subjective. You end up having to get to know a little bit of somebody's story to offer an appropriate answer. So taking them through that exercise, it was challenging to them. And I've got messages from guys on my phone that are like, man, I was terrified and wanting nothing to do with that, but I'm so thankful that I did. I'm so thankful I spent time wrestling with these questions I didn't necessarily want to touch with a 10-foot pole. And here's the beauty of it is this, and it goes back to what I said before, is apologetics is for you, because I believe if you do the work now and you really do seek to know the depth of who God is, even through the confusing parts or the challenging parts, working through that tension is what's going to grow intimacy. So if my wife, Casey, if I chose to get to know her on a pretty deep level, we get married, she says I do, I've got proof that we're married in our marriage certificate, she said I do and I will, and I can come to the table and tell you guys I'm married today. But let's just pretend I just stopped there and I didn't ask her any more questions. If all of a sudden there were some unique habits that I had questions about but didn't want to ask because I'd be afraid to potentially disrupt things, our intimacy would immediately hit a ceiling. And I think that's a really simplified way of putting this idea of how we relate to God. Because the truth is, a growing intimate relationship with my wife comes through wrestling through hard questions. A couple that's been married for 50 years and tells you what love is going to tell you about the different battles they've worked through and the fights that they've had to wrestle out and figure out and deal with the truth. And I think that's part of what I want you all to know today is why apologetics is so important, is because at the other side of this tension, some of the awkwardness you may feel, I believe that there's just more intimacy with God because you know more of Him, and it's an invitation for more. So it's not to figure God out necessarily, because that is not the case. And funny enough, I was talking with Will Gray, who's over here, and he was talking to me about questions that he just realized he will probably never have an answer for. And that's a promise too. Just because you're seeking after an answer does not mean that you get what you want. And that's actually necessary in this pursuit of apologetics, because God is only going to be God if, let me rephrase that. Our desire, I think our innate desire, is to get all the questions or get all the answers to our questions. And I'd argue that actually kind of comes back to some of our desire to be God of our own life. That I actually really just want all the questions because I want to be in control of this whole thing. So we can seek out, we can work through these difficult questions, have some objective truths that support our reasoning for for not losing our intellectual honesty and placing our faith in God, which I do believe matters. I want to remain honest in my intellectual pursuit of God, knowing that there's going to be a cap in certain areas of my life and questions that I ask that He just says, that's not for you. And it's actually a gift. And in that, you can be freed up to then say, I don't know that, and God has not revealed that to me, but I do know that He's a good Father. Because here's what I can tell you about the resurrection and evidence for it. And the work that I did to get there continues to bring me back to some of the truths that come from wrestling with apologetics in a way that maybe you don't want to, but you don't realize how that's going to influence your life story later on. Really quick story about one of the Iron Man guys. His name's Heath and his wife's name is Sarah, and I'd actually ask that you would be praying for them. Heath Calhoun and his wife Sarah, she was actually diagnosed with cancer about a month and a half ago. She was 21 weeks pregnant when she was diagnosed, And Heath he was a part of this Ironman group that we were doing, and we're in our last semester, so he's been in it for a year and a half. And I actually got to sit there with Lisa and with Oliver and pray for him and his wife, and to hear Heath, and I didn't try to tee him up at all. And I hope this isn't me saying, oh, we did a great job with Ironman, but Heath was able to sit there and share how thankful he was that he'd been wrestling through the hard questions, that he had actually dealt with some of the things that he was dealing with God in that space. He would never have been prepared for what was to come in the cancer diagnosis with his wife. And to know that just like that little bit of effort that he put in to wrestle with the hard questions has now at least given him some bit of foundation and ground to stand on in the midst of a suffering and a fear that I can only imagine. But to look in his eyes and see him say sincerely, I'm holding on to truths that I know now, it's potentially life-changing. And I think the dynamic of their family is shifting because of that. So I hope that you get my point in regards to why apologetics matters to you, is because you have an opportunity to know God in a deeper way because of this. And also you know that life is going to keep coming. And if we can be equipped to have a reason for dealing with it in certain ways, apologetics is a great way to do that. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure we're good on time here. So what we're going to do now, we're going to have another little discussion here at your table. All right, can we get the question 2 up there? All right, so I hope this is a fun one. Maybe you have an answer for this and maybe you don't. And maybe that's revealing. But the question is this: when have you been asked a faith question you didn't know how to answer? How did it make you feel, and how did you respond? So we'll take 5 more minutes, and we'll come back, and I'd love to hear some of your answers on that. So take 5.
My daughter was diagnosed with medulloblastoma.
If you are sleeping in a position like this, you are wrecking your body.
All right. Any brave souls willing to share some of their responses to this? I'm pretty good at silence, by the way, just so you know. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's good. Any others? Or any shared feelings at the table that were relatable?
I found for me the questions that are hardest are the ones that touch on like the experience of abandonment.
Hmm.
Just really being tragically forsaken in a moment, and like how how do we think about that and approach that when it's like it can reflect on God.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I might table like a less cleaned up version of that answer, but that might be my answer.
Thanks for sharing that. I think that's, those are the ones that can actually be maybe most terrifying to hear, right? Because it's like, I don't have an answer for that that's going to satisfy maybe what somebody's looking for. So that is deeply relatable, and I think at its core, maybe what can, at least for me, what I was sharing was like the fear. What can happen is somebody asks a question. I immediately think I don't have an answer or know the answer. I start to feel insecure, and I'm like, man, I should know this. If I say I believe this, then this is something that should just be in my back pocket, and it's not. And the next thing you know, I'm actually much more concerned about how I'm feeling than how they're feeling. And that's like the big reveal for me in this is I can just get so wrapped up in how am I being perceived by this person who's asking an honest question and didn't say, hey, how does this make you feel? Like how quickly, I can do this in marriage, I can do it in relationship with another person, but how quickly I find myself moving back to me as it relates to these questions is it's deeply humbling. And so what I would say that's going to kind of drive some of this next part of this discussion is trying to understand barriers people face and how to respond to those. I want to tie us back again to 1 Peter 3:15. If people do ask us a question, to go back to what it is that we actually have in the hopper and experience rather than trying to conjure up something I actually don't know, that it's okay to just say you don't know. And that, for me, I know has been one of the greatest gifts that I can offer people is to sincerely say, that's a great question. I don't have an answer for you, but I want to sit with you in it. And I think that's part of the nudge that I want to continue to have for this group as we think about our mission as a church, and the opportunity that we have to be a space for people to ask honest questions and know that it's okay that they hear, we don't know, but we do want to take up presence in their life. And we want to seek out questions or seek out answers with them. Like what an opportunity to get to say, you know what, I'm just like you and I don't know an answer to that really hard question. I would love to get back together though and talk about this more. It doesn't mean you're going to come to some perfect conclusion, but I think what it does mean is you get to build trust and build a relationship and love somebody well. what we're going to talk about next, if we can shift to the next, you can go one more. That's a lot of words right up there. But I hope that you guys can take this as a tool more than anything. But the barriers people face, one of the things that I talk about within Search in the context of relational evangelism, we have kind of a method of ministry for what we do, and it's called the 1, 2, 3. And the 1, this is not up there, this is the 3. But the 1 is rooted in Luke 15, and that is, Jesus' emphasis on loving the one. And that's actually the most important thing for us to consider as it relates to a ministry in our lives. And one thing I would challenge you all with is, as you think about apologetics, I would love for you to consider a person. If you took the time, and if you don't have to do that right now, but I'd challenge you to sincerely pray about who would God put on your heart. If there was one person that you just know they don't know Jesus, I'm certain of that. What would it look like to just start praying for that person, to value that one person? I promise you, if you're going to start praying for that person, God's going to do something in that person's life as well. And that may mean that you start to collide with those people more and more. It's incredible. Thanks for sharing that. And that is, the fact that we have angels in heaven celebrating when that one person comes to faith, it's like that shouldn't be minimized ever. So thank you for sharing that. And I just believe that if our hearts are willing to think smaller for the sake of thinking more personally, I believe that your ministry and the way that God is going to work in somebody's life is going to be emphasized. And so I want to challenge all of us to be people who pray for that one person before we try to give them an answer. And there may be a space where you need to be the answer person for them. But that is one thing I know as it relates to apologetics. If I have a person in mind, I said before, you yourself should be that person in mind as well. But as we get near the heart of Jesus, we recognize his heart for the lost, for the person who does not know him. And so that's the 1. The 2 is everybody's spiritual journey is a process, and God is responsible for the results. And so I want you to hear that before we get into these 3 barriers, because I believe that really can inspire a vision for ministry in your life. That you may be a small part of a person's journey in faith. We reference this thing called the Ingalls scale, and if you looked at it, you got -10 over here if that's somebody who is an atheist, as far from God as you could possibly be. A 0 is coming to faith in Jesus, and a 10 is somebody who's, they're walking and glowing like Jesus. We reference that to give people a picture of a spiritual journey. If you think back on your own life, and you think about what were the different points in time that God put specific people or conversations in my way that caused me to take a next step toward God. And I believe that's for us when we were non-believers coming to faith, and I believe that's still the case now. What does that next step toward God look like in your life? And if we can realize that this is a process and we have an opportunity to be a part of what God may be doing in somebody's life at this moment in time, you may not reap what you've sown. But I'll tell you what, you may be somebody who gets to experience the fruit of the ministry and time that somebody put into somebody's life 10 years prior. So it's a call to be present in the moment. Don't feel like you have to get somebody over the line to be able to say, I did it, I finished the job. Be present and meet them where they are with the hope that you carry, knowing that, God may give you 10 people the next month that come to faith and you baptize them or Oliver baptizes them. That'd be a win. I'm always cheering for that. But I think sometimes we can lose our sense of presence with a person if we think that we have to close the deal. Because the truth is, you don't close the deal. Like, the Holy Spirit does that work, and I believe that the moment we can recognize that, I can actually enjoy and love a person a bit more freely, because I'm not the one who dictates the outcome of their heart. You aren't good enough or bad enough to keep somebody from the heart of God. I promise you that. And so the moment we can grab that, we can then say, okay, I don't have to be in charge of this. I'm not in control. I surrender a bit and I move toward a person for the sake of just knowing them and loving them and hopefully getting to share a hope that I have in Jesus with them. And that now brings up these three barriers. And I hope that this is helpful. And I hope that this kind of frames apologetics as not just intellectual arguments, but more of like a whole person obstacle. So the three barriers are the emotional barrier, the intellectual barrier, and the spiritual barrier. The emotional barriers, really think of somebody that you know who is, they're not going to go anywhere near the doors of a church because of what happened to them in church growing up. You say the word church and they just cringe and they say, I'm good on that. There's somebody who, a trusted friend who claimed a faith in Jesus, completely blew up their life. And, let's just say somebody was a Ravi Zacharias fan and they actually put him up on a pedestal and he falls. You see how people tie their hope to an experience that damaged their emotions in such a way that it stops their journey. It becomes a true barrier to their next step toward God. So that's a picture of what an emotional barrier is. And now our response to that, when somebody is hurt, when somebody is suffering, when something happens we don't necessarily have an intellectual answer for, my response there is relationship. My response there is presence, for the sake of allowing them to express their hurt and building a relationship, rather than trying to just provide a right answer for them. The next barrier is the intellectual barrier, and this is a bit more of I'd say the classical apologetic questions that you get, where people really are sincerely wrestling with the objective truth that doesn't seem to align with, or the objective truth they think they have that doesn't align with, let's say, the reliability of the Bible, or whether Jesus really did exist, or the problem of evil in the world. And so there are absolutely people who simply have intellectual barriers where you can just, you provide a response that they've never heard before, and a wall comes down. And honestly, it's a huge victory. But I would argue this, in the 11 years that I've been doing search, oftentimes people will feign an intellectual barrier for the sake of an emotional barrier that's much deeper underneath. And so people will fire off question after question, and you start to realize, you actually don't want the answer to that question. That's not satisfying a thing for you. So in that is where we're reminded, all the know-how that we have in our back pocket is actually useless for the moment. And I need to just take a breath, pray about what it is, God, that you want me to see in this person or know of this person. And so it changes our gait in the way that we ask a better question, in the way that we really seek to know their heart, rather than, again, we're so drawn to, I think, the fix. And I promise, if we can hang on to the fact that we aren't responsible for their heart, but God actually desires for them to experience love, I think we can start to be more present and less answer prone. And I'm not saying that you don't, to have the answers is a bad thing. It's just remembering to see the person as somebody who God desires to experience the love of the Holy Spirit overflowing in your life. If that's what they experience, I believe you're doing it right. If you're just regurgitating a 5-minute response you memorized, 2 weeks ago, I'd argue maybe pump the brakes a bit and just check your heart. Maybe that is the place, maybe that is the play, but I just want to offer that more as a governor of sorts as we wrestle with more of the questions, the practical questions we'll have in the coming weeks. I hope that this at least is a filter for you to say, okay, how am I thinking about this? Do I see this as something to weaponize, or do I see this as something to hold in my back pocket and continue to seek the Holy Spirit's leading in my life as it relates to the way I use this? The last barrier is the spiritual barrier. And this is basically, it's a spiritual issue, a heart that doesn't want God to be God, and they don't want God in their life. So I want to share a story with you about my brother Gabe. I didn't see that coming, honestly. But he's my oldest brother. I grew up one of 4 boys. I'm the third of 4. We've got 7 of us now. My parents adopted 3 kids when the youngest of us 4 was graduating college. It was crazy. But my brother Gabe, he was always somebody I looked up to. He was somebody who who was faithful for a number of years in his life. And he left the faith probably, 7 years ago. And it was heartbreaking for me. And as he kind of wrestled with, as I sought to listen and understand, I realized a bit more of my brother's journey and how he got to where he was and where he is. But what I'd tell you is this: there was a night that he and I kind of like earmarked to have like a bigger discussion, like an apologetic night, is what I'd say it was. We sat at a Sidewall Pizza on Pelham Road, and we talked through. He fired off on every question that he had, and we walked through all of the answers that would objectively best support what he was wrestling with, and we truly like shut the place down. It closed, and we got back in the car, and we pulled into our driveway, and I finally got to the point where I was like, okay, we've been talking for like 3 hours, and before we got out of the car, I asked my brother Gabe. I said, okay, so let me lay something out there for you. Let's just pretend that you do believe that God is the God of the Bible, and that He actually is all of who He says that He is. I said, would you submit to Him? Would you come under His authority? And my brother said no. And honestly, that's the first time I'd ever seen that. I was like, come on, like if you know the truth, don't you want the truth? Because I'm tempted to say all of us want the truth, but I think it actually emphasizes the cost of discipleship and what it means to surrender our lives to Jesus. It emphasized that in a very unique way to me, that has honestly shifted my gears as it relates to prayer for my brother specifically, and I think the power of prayer. That if we aren't praying for people, then we're trying to play a game that is it's way below, I think, what God's actually up to in the spiritual world. And I want to challenge you all to be, if you come out of this praying for people more than you ever have any conversation, I promise you that's more powerful than any words you're going to offer. And, my brother is still very much lost, but I believe and I hope that there will be a day that he absolutely is humbled and is brought back to the feet of Jesus and places his faith in Him. But for me to walk through what I thought I ticked the boxes on the emotional barriers, the intellectual barriers, sought to understand, listened well, and then it was kind of, okay, I guess this really isn't up to me. God, this has to be you. That is just I think, a picture for you all as we think about these barriers. We can attempt to knock them down or at least knock on those walls, but you really don't need to carry the weight either of feeling like you need to be the one who solves it for somebody. Seek to know them, seek to love them. That is your obedience to God. He doesn't call you to change the hearts of people. And that's something that I believe is freeing, that actually allows you to see people, know people, and love people right where they are, even if their arguments seem absolutely insane to you. So I would say that the way that we engage matters just as much as what we say. What I want to do now, let's see. So I guess one other thing that I'll share a couple of these because I think we got the time for it. There was an article that I read, probably like a year and a half ago, and it's by James Clear. Do you guys know who James Clear is? He's the guy who, what's that? He wrote the book Atomic Habits, New York Times bestseller. He's popular on that front, and he wrote this article. He's not a believer, but he wrote an article that truly did give me some ahas as it relates to what the world is actually looking for. Let me see if I can find real quick. Sorry. So the title of the article is called "Why Facts Don't Change Our Minds." And the more that you read about James Clear, I know you're just taking my word for it, but he does his homework, and he's somebody who, his reference points are ones that I'd say are worthwhile, and so I think he's worth reading and worth listening to. But he had a couple just quotes and ideas in this article that he wrote, and I'm going to read a few of them to you, and I want you to think about this through the lens of apologetics and our tendency to want to try to change somebody, because he kind of hit me between the eyes in terms of what our approach is, and I think this may influence some of what your ministry may look like in this life. Because I'm going to read some of these, and then I've got a question for you all to think about. But first thing he said was, this famous economist, J.K. Galbraith, once wrote, "Faced with a choice between changing one's mind and proving there is no need to do so, almost everyone gets busy with the proof." He then says, Leo Tolstoy was even bolder. He said, "The most difficult subjects can be explained to the most slow-witted man if he has not formed any idea of them already. But the simplest thing cannot be made clear to the most intelligent man if he is firmly persuaded that he knows already, without a shadow of a doubt, what is laid before him." So he goes on to offer a few takes on how people respond to the truth and what folks are actually after. And he says a few things like this. Steven Pinker, in his article, he references this. He says, "People are embraced or condemned according to their beliefs. So one function of the mind may be to hold beliefs that bring the belief holder the greatest number of allies, protectors, or disciples, rather than beliefs that are most likely to be true." So another thought that he had in this article was, facts don't change minds, friendship does. He says the people who are most likely to change our minds are the ones we agree with on 98% of topics. So think about that as it relates to people in your life and folks that you might have a ministry with. He says, your time is better spent championing good ideas than tearing down bad ones. Don't waste time explaining why bad ideas are bad. You are simply fanning the flame of ignorance and stupidity. And he says, any idea that is sufficiently different from your current worldview will feel threatening. And the best place to ponder a threatening idea is in a non-threatening environment. I got two more for you. He says, always remember that to argue and win is to break down the reality of the person you are arguing against. It is painful to lose your reality, so be kind, even if you are right. The word kind originated from the word kin. When you are kind to someone, it means you are treating them like family. This, I think, is a good method for actually changing someone's life, or changing their mind. So I share that to say, this is a guy who's a non-believer, recognizing the tendency of human beings to either move toward changing their life or not. To disrupt somebody's truth is to disrupt what is, like, what they believe is their current reality and is their current reality. So I hope that a reference to an article like this is something that just causes you to change your pace a bit and remember the person who's in front of you. Have that one mentality in place so that you don't go in thinking you got to swing for the fences. But are you asking yourself the question, are you creating that space that is kind, that is patient, that is truly loving as Jesus has loved you? And for me, all I got to do is think about the patience that Jesus has for me now and has had for me in the past. So are we offering that type of patience with the people we say we love? We got 5 minutes. So to close this out, because I want to respect your time, let's go to the very last slide. So I always feel like it's healthy and good to just have practical applications for listening and continuing the conversation specifically today. I hope that what we've talked about as it relates to apologetics reminds you that like objective truth is important. I believe that wrestling with these questions in a thoughtful manner is invaluable and needs to be done, and I think we're going to do that in the coming weeks. But I hope that we also realize how integral, like seeing the person, knowing the person, listening to the person, understanding them, how much that is going to serve the way in which we use those words and those answers. So this last page, I hope, really is more of just kind of a reminder for you to lead with listening. How do you learn how to ask curious questions? Really seek to know the person. Don't be so concerned about getting to your answer just because you know it's right. Have you actually sought out to understand where this person is coming from? Because it's amazing how once you start to hear their background, the way it shifts your gears and your approach. Because you can actually start to understand why they're an atheist. And I'm not saying that means they're right, but you can understand how they get somewhere. And it sure does change your heart and your compassion for the human being that's in front of you that's had an experience that you don't know. And I hope that is just a reminder to, like, listening is not just hear the words, say I got it. I've done that plenty. Funny enough, it's like a counseling, right? Casey and I, my wife, we've done plenty of marriage counseling. And I've gone to marriage counseling before, and he gives me instructions on, like, what to do. And he says, I want you to, have couch time with your wife, and I want you to ask these 3 questions, and, like, this is what you say. And it's incredible how if you do that and your heart's not attached to it, how silly you look. Casey, she's like, you don't get it. I'm like, but I said what I was supposed to say, right? Isn't that the deal? Like, the counselor said I'm supposed to do this, and I did it, and she's like, you're not listening. I mean, it's so cliche. But the truth is, like, it gets to the heart of, like, do you hear the heart behind what it is that he's asking you to do? Do you hear the heart of Jesus calling you to love people in a way that is, like, truly of him and not of you? It's not about you. And I think that is, it's deeply humbling because your ego gets crushed in those moments. And it's actually at your neediest, when the ego is down, that I believe Jesus restores, redeems, and actually can do work with that. Like, we can't embrace the gospel without being deeply needy people. You don't have it figured out, and that's okay. It's actually necessary. So I hope that some of the nudges you see up here, we don't have to go through the rest of these because I think they speak for themselves. But maybe the last one I'd say, the bridging the classical and cultural questions. Maybe we'll spend some more time talking about that at the next meeting, but getting to the heart of their question. Quick example I'd give was an open forum. One of the guys asked, it was the first question. I usually tell the guys, especially like if they are Christian, I'm like, let's try to avoid church as a focus point, and let's start somewhere a bit broader. Well, he steps up to the plate and says, where should my wife and I go to church? I was like, okay, that's a good question, but if I can, and this is like, and I hope the guys got my point. I said, I appreciate your question. I'm happy to get back to it. But what if I asked you, like, why did you get married in the first place? And he was like, well, because you get married, right? And all of a sudden you're like, okay, so that's why? He's like, well, my parents got married, and this was just something that I thought you do. And I could almost ask that question to you all, right? And you start to realize, like, man, I guess I don't know, why did I get married in the moment? Because it was a next step, right? And as he and I started to unpack it a bit more within the group, the big reveal was he wasn't just looking to know what church he was supposed to go to. There was something much deeper. There was no compass. And he was like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. He lived a life of, yeah, I'm supposed to get married. I'm probably supposed to have kids too, so I guess we'll do that. But when you start to peel back the onion, you recognize, man, I don't think you actually have a foundation that's directing your next steps. And so when we bridge the classical and cultural questions, what I'm saying is there's people who have, passionate questions, but at the heart of them, if you can get back to foundational issues, like what they believe about truth, it then starts to challenge the way that they then do anything in their life. So if we can't get clear on that, if we can't take some steps back and say, hey, I just want to make sure we're on the same page, then I think we can get way ahead of ourselves on trying to just answer a question that's actually not being answered in the right context, if that makes sense. So that is it's about all the time we got, and I wanted to leave some time for John to close things out here. But I do hope that this is really just an introduction. And that it just left a taste in your mouth for apologetics that is practical, but also we see the transformational work that God does through it, and that it's something you consider for yourself, and how is God going to work out some things in your heart through apologetics, and then also how does this influence the ministry he has in your life. So I appreciate you guys just giving me time to share, and John, all you, man. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Graham. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, really helpful. I've gotten to meet with Graham a couple times and basically just like learn a little bit, like a little sneak preview, and it's been really good, really helpful stuff. And over the next month, we're going to come back to this topic of apologetics. So before you go, and we're going to have to go quickly here, but if you can, if possible, at your table on that note card, get a scribe and write down 2 questions that either your table discussed already, they could be broad or really specific, but 2 questions that if you could come back here on October 12th and hear from Nick Langione the perfect answer, what would your question be? So 2 questions, write them down, and then go get your kids from downstairs. Guys, your time is up. The babysitter has left. Your kids are unattended downstairs, going wild.